Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 17th of June, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and with me, Patrick Henningsen. Afternoon, Pat.
Good afternoon, Mike.
I think we'll just get straight on here. We've got, let's start with the issue of the day, which, of course, is child sexual abuse. The NSPCC here reporting that suspected cases have soared, and they're claiming 85 new cases per day on average. Peter Wanless, who's the chief executive, said these figures are disturbing and clearly illustrate child sexual abuse is a continuing and widespread problem that needs urgent action. Indeed it is. What are you doing about it, Peter Wanless? That's what I would like to know. However, the most interesting comment, I think, came from an unnamed government spokeswoman in this independent article, and I didn't see any other mainstream articles naming this unnamed government spokeswoman. And she said, children must be protected from the systemic and appalling cases of abuse we've seen. That is why the Prime Minister hosted a Downing Street summit earlier this year to launch new measures to better protect victims and survivors. Shall we say Melanie Shaw at this point? Bring more offenders to justice and ensure those who are charged with protecting our children are held properly accountable. Well, they're not holding themselves accountable. That she went on to say, we have given child sexual abuse the status of a national threat so that it is prioritised by every police force. We will shortly launch a new child sexual abuse task force and centre of expertise to improve local responses, and we have provided a further £7 million funding to organisations to support victims. So this has become a national threat status, Pat, which to me means that they are so scared of the lid coming off this and people appreciating the scale of institutional child abuse, including by those at Westminster, that they feel that they need to shut this down. So they're going to pile pots of money into the police investigation. And we have seen some evidence of this ourselves, by the way, which I'm not going to say any more about that at this time. But we've seen some evidence of that, where the police clearly attempting to discover who knows what, where they know it, where they're holding that information. And we'll see how that progresses. But I think this national threat status for the child sexual abuse issue is an extremely dangerous development, and we need to keep an eye on it. So, we were talking about Melanie Shaw situation on Monday, and there was a tweet went out, Patrick, and one of the responses that came back was asking a question, what is Melanie Shaw's MP doing about this? Are they not supporting her? And I asked the question in response, or the question I do ask is, why are 648 more or less of the 650 MPs in Westminster absolutely silent on this issue? Why does nobody turn up for debates or discussions when the likes of Simon Danczuk or John Mann attempt to create a debate in Parliament? The Commons chamber is more or less empty. Really, what is this government doing to progress the public inquiry? There can be no confidence that they're actually taking this issue seriously. They're taking it seriously, clearly, from their own point of view, giving it national threat status, but they're not taking it seriously from the point of view of the general public or indeed the victims themselves.
Yeah, it's a difficult issue. It spills into many other areas. This is the problem with this particular issue, is that it just opens the door, 10 more doors open after you open one. So and you have to wonder, why is it a national emergency? Is it a national emergency because it's an pandemic, it's an institutional epidemic, or because it threatens the current establishment?
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental question I think the media should be asking right now. When you see a statement like that, that should be challenged by some of the commentators and writers in the mainstream media, but I don't see that happening at this particular time.
Well, indeed, and I refer to yesterday's UK Column News programme, where we highlighted a post by Glenn Greenwald, who really tearing strips off the Times newspaper for unchallenged regurgitation of comments from unnamed government officials, and not willing to offer any kind of sensible challenge to these people, who they are, what they are, and no description to the public as to what they are.
I think a lot of other people are worried too, Mike, because along with all the child abuse cases, one positive thing in that article said that they're allocating resources towards victim support, which I think is at least acknowledging that the victim support issue is huge. But one of the main problems is that with the police being involved in knowledge of, let's say, take the Jimmy Savile case, for instance, having previous knowledge of many of Savile's dastardly deeds, sitting on it, losing files, losing evidence, and so forth. One has to ask that are extra resources being allocated so they can gather more intelligence about who's up to what, and then sit on it again. And so a lot of critics are concerned about that.
Yeah.
And I think the police need to come out and give the public assurance that that's not why this is happening.
As I say, that unfortunately, we have some evidence ourselves that is exactly what is happening. Can't say any more about that just at the moment. And sort of along the same vein, if the Express here, ID card for every child in Scotland. Now, we've covered quite a bit with David Scott that Scotland, in an attempt to make sure the establishment has a good supply of institutional children for abuse, is that unfair? I don't know. Created the named person scheme, so that's putting health workers alongside every child in Scotland, and they're going to be monitoring the progress of every child, and of course offering early warnings if they see anything they don't quite like. And the example that the Express gives here is that they would flag up any parents who refuse vaccinations, for example. Now, the SNP is to create a £12 million database, according to the Express here, and that's going to provide an ID card for every child in Scotland, and this absolute trove of information. What is going to be done with it? They describe it as a trove of information, and it's going to be joined with an upgraded NHS database. This is spectacular, cradle to grave tracking of individuals, and really, what can you say about it?
It seems like Scotland. There's a lot of talk about independent Scotland this year, but it seems like Scotland has constructed the perfect archetypal police state for the new world. You've got effectively a one-party state. You've got a unified corporatized police force. You've got state-appointed guardians for every child. You've got ID, could be a biometric ID, we don't know, for every child. So this cradle to grave sort of tracking, a ward of the state, as it were, and the family's off there on the side. It's like, you'll be able to look after your kid too. So Scotland's got the perfect sort of Orwellian police state constructed here. So
absolutely
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Net neutrality, Pat.
Yes, net neutrality. Okay, big debate earlier this year. In the United States, the FCC, the new regulations for net neutrality have become active on Friday. So we have our first legal challenge already. It's Wednesday this week. We've got our first legal challenge. 3 days into the week, Time Warner Cable. It's one of the big cable providers in America, probably one of the big three. And so they've been challenged. One of the challengers is a small to medium-sized business that does video streaming. They're accusing Time Warner of charging them to deliver their live video stream. So this is an interesting legal challenge, but again, this is a very complex issue. But this is an issue also that is going to affect UK businesses. I would even say independent media companies too. So it would be interesting to see how these initial legal challenges test the concept of net neutrality.
Do you think net neutrality is a genuine debate?
I can see both sides of this argument. I can see both sides of the argument. However, I don't trust big government. I trust big government as much as I trust big business in terms of monopolizing or trying to profiteer off. Because I've been into third world countries, Mike, where there is no net neutrality, and the cost of data, consequently, as well, the cost of data is skyrocketing, and it's only wealthy people can afford it. So there's swings and roundabouts to this argument. Now we have a good infrastructure in America. There's a lot of free access, free data, and so forth. But in other parts of the world, it's much more constricted.
The reason I ask that question is because I kind of view this as the providers of free content like Google, for example, who are relying on freely available access to the internet in order to gather the data, the advertising revenues, and the rest of it. you've got this pile of people over here, and then you've got the telecoms companies that are piling billions of pounds into the infrastructure, and they don't, these two don't gel. And it just seems to me it's one corporation set against another corporation set, and really the man in the middle, which is us, aren't really ever going to get a look in on this issue.
Yeah.
I mean, your point about the third world countries in Africa and so on, of course, a lot of the expense there is relying on mobile networks to do that job.
Absolutely.
And they don't have the physical infrastructure there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you disagree with that?
Well, I think it's, again, there's different aspects to this conversation that you can get into and explore different compartments of it, but I think it's still in the dynamic phase right now.
Yeah.
But these legal challenges are going to be really important to look at, because that's going to tell you where it's going to be heading in the near term.
Okay, good. Well, we'll move on to Greece then, because obviously the potential for Greece to exit the euro is, it's marching on every day, every minute. In fact, it's getting closer. So Financial Times here suggesting that George Osborne has been stepping up UK plans for a Greek exit from now. In about 10 minutes or so, we're going to show an interview that I did yesterday where we discuss these issues and really the broader context of Greece and the financial system. But this story, I think, should be viewed in the context of this article from Reuters. When was that? On the 26th of May, so not too long ago. EU regulators telling 11 countries to adopt bank bail-in rules, and they were giving them 2 months to get that adoption complete. So really the question then to be asked is, what was the European Commission, what were they foreseeing at that point? They were clearly concerned about Greece. And of course, we've got to remember that this is one of the points that's made in the interview in a moment. The key point about Greece here, first of all, is that this debt is not Greek debt. This was debt which Greece took on in order to bail out other banks, the European banking system. And the second point here is that the European Commission has their back against the European Union, has their back against the wall here, because there's so much derivatives junk sitting on top of the debt that's around Greece, that if they were to forgive any of that debt, it would bring down a huge world of pain on themselves. So they can't forgive any of this debt. On the other hand, the Greeks can't pay the debt, because if they do, they're going to start killing people literally. So it's a pretty dangerous situation. Yeah,
and the most frustrating thing about this is, of course, this is almost like a fait accompli today across every news agency. Greek, be prepared to exit for the euro, et cetera, et cetera. There's still a chance for an 11th hour rescue. I'm saying a small chance, but I wouldn't rule that out. I wouldn't rule that out. However, it's all being framed like the Greeks somehow have lived beyond their means, and it's the Greeks' fault, et cetera, and it's going to be bad for everybody, bad, and shame on Greece. But no one's going to address the real source of the problem to begin with, and that's just going to get washed away in all the hype and all the sort of crisis media coverage, and that's really sad, because then we haven't learned the lesson. So again, Greece being blamed for the collapse of the euro, perhaps.
Yes.
That's what it's going to end up with. Easy to point the finger at Greece, but not easy to point the finger at all the banks that lined up dumping junk bonds after worthless paper and debt and derivative debt, all on the Greeks themselves. So are we going to get to the bottom of that conversation nationally or Europe-wide? I don't think so. I don't see that happening right now. In the media, I don't see our politicians stepping up and calling a spade a spade, So that's sad. That's really sad. Things don't go aren't going terribly well for Obama at the moment with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So we've got the Register here talking about this. That is now stalled, according to the Australian Trade Minister. Obama failed to get his fast-track vote through on Monday, was it? And then they had another go yesterday, and they failed again. So Obama really in trouble over the TPP. Absolutely. And this looked like this thing was gaining speed a few months ago, and it looks like the media and a lot of people had sort of lost track of it because of other events that were going on. And then in the last 2 months, there's been a lot more movement on this issue in the press, and some politicians have taken a stand. Ironically, one of the political groups in America that really oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, is the Tea Party, and that sort of effectively wing of the GOP, or the Republican Party. So they put a lot of pressure, and those Tea Party-leaning congressmen and senators made this a big issue in Washington really quickly. And so to lop a little more pressure on the TTIP and the TPP, Hillary Clinton's taken a position that seems to be Trans-Pacific.
Well, is it? Because what she actually said was it should either be the full deal or it shouldn't happen at all. So
it appears to be.
You can spin that either way, couldn't you?
Hillary Clinton is absolutely a globalist. She's a Bilderberger, so I don't see why she would be against it. But she would want to create contrast with the current sitting president, Democrat president, which is Barack Obama. That's why she's taken this position.
Yes, I think she's pretty nervous about the fact that Obama is behaving in the way that he is. So Obama actually has approached this problem. He's basically said to the Democrat, because actually he has lost his vote because the entire Democratic Party has voted against him, more or less. And he then went for the second vote and said, you vote for this or else, sort of thing. And this was quite similar to Cameron's approach with when he was touring Europe and wanting to renegotiate the relationship with Europe. And he came back to government ministers and said, yeah, I either agree with what I'm doing here or you resign. And this kind of arrogance, I mean, people doesn't sit well with people, and clearly Obama has overstepped the mark with his own so-called support.
Absolutely. And the Australian Trade Minister is at panic stations this week because Australia was really running point on the TTP. So they've already adopted a lot of these policies already and put them into beta mode. Specifically with regards to copyright, allowing corporations access to ISPs to shut individual users down, having to bypass a lot of the due process that was there before. So even the Australian Trade Minister is saying this week is 2 to 3 weeks away from a sort of fatal situation for both trade agreements. So if this continues on, so we'll wait and see how resilient this particular movement is, but it'll be interesting. It'll be a big 2016 election issue regardless.
Yes.
It will be huge. And so Hillary will have to take some sort of moderate position because definitely the GOP, most of the contenders, the populist contenders, will be against it.
But of course it's not going well for the TTIP either, which is the European US version. So here's EU Reporter pointing out a few days ago that in fact it was the 10th of June, the European Parliament dropped a vote and a debate on TTIP, much to the disappointment of the anti-TTIP groups within the European Parliament, because they were hoping to make their point. But clearly what's happened here is that there were so many people signed the petition over TTIP, and there were so many amendments tabled over the potential vote and the debate that they had no choice but to put this back. So they've put it back, according to this article, because of huge public pressure. And once again, this whole sort of pan-national corporatist trade arrangements on both sides of both the Atlantic and the Pacific, absolutely on the rocks.
Yeah, and Hollywood pumped a lot of money into Democratic coffers to make sure that this particular deal happens right now. So over the last 2 election cycles, so there's some big major players in entertainment and in the banking industry as well that want to see this happen.
Yeah,
it's a lot of pressure from the elite corporate level.
Well, speaking of the banking industry, Royal Bank of Scotland demonstrating once again that they are utterly bankrupt. And what are they using as the excuse? An IT glitch. So 600,000 payments, overnight payments, didn't take place. So people didn't get their debits and credits taken and put into their bank accounts, apparently because of an IT glitch. And of course, it is not the first time that this has happened to RBS. NatWest, Ulster Bank, all part of this group. Coutts Bank as well, part of this group. And RBS said on Twitter, some customer payments are missing this morning. We are investigating the issue as a matter of urgency. And of course, every time that RBS comes close to running out of money, they switch the computers off. That's a simple, that's a simple solution, the simple answer to this problem. And of course, they pick up the pieces later. Now, they were fined, I think, £56 million for the last major IT glitch that they had. And in fact, their chief executive wasn't allowed to take his bonus. Hopefully, he will lose his job this time.
Does that count as a tax expense for them when they pay the fine? I was always wondering that.
That's a good question.
Can they write that off?
That's a good question.
Anyway.
Don't know. Okay, jobs, salaries. I was just staggered, but I had to put this article up because I was staggered by the headline. Joy for British workers as pay rises at the fastest rate for 8 years.
A feel-good article.
A feel-good article.
I didn't know you guys did feel-good articles.
Well, unfortunately, it's not true. So no, let's keep it up there in a second, Nick. Right. So, pay for employees, according to the Express, increased by 2.7% in the 3 months to April compared to the same period a year earlier. Now, this is very carefully worded to imply that there's a 2.7% rise in 3 months, which of course is not true. But it's very cleverly worded, and this is according to the ONS, the Office for National Statistics. So average pay, excluding bonuses, was found to be £462 per week, while pay including bonuses was £493 per week. Okay, so let's just have a look at this. So here we go. Here's wages. Unfortunately, I've forgotten to put the numbers on here, but the yellow bar is wages in 2000, January 2000, and the blue bar is wages in January 2013. And what you can see there is that in January 2000, it was around £300 or so. I think it was £307. And in 2013, it was £470 per week was the average salary. So you look a bit closer and you discover at the on the ONS website that it says the estimates are in current prices. This means they are not adjusted for price inflation. So let's just do that now. Let's just adjust for price inflation and see what happens.
Ooh.
And look at that.
Fancy that.
If you take inflation into account, wages between January 2000 and January 2013 did not change on average by a single pound. Is that a coincidence? I think it is a coincidence, but what it says is that there has been no wage growth in real terms over the last 15 years, really.
Well, if you work for the National Office of Statistics or the department, you get sacked for using the inflation index. Shame on you.
Shame on me. And here's what King David said. Latest ONS job figures show our plan is working with 400,000 more jobs in a year, wages rising and record numbers of women in work. Well, let's just keep that up a second, Nick. Let's just put this into a bit of perspective. There were 9.02 million people, according to the ONS, aged between 16 and 64, who were out of work and not seeking or available for work. 9.02 million people out of a population of 60 million. That is a spectacular number. But it's okay because that's 10,000 fewer than in the 3 months to January 2015. So that's progress, and 60,000 more, though, than a year earlier. Of that, 1.8, so no, in fact, this is a separate number, 1.81 million unemployed people. So that means that we've got 10.8 people not providing for themselves through gainful employment in this country. That's a spectacular number, is it not?
It is. It's always job creation. We've created these jobs. This is what we've done. So if anyone's had a 2.9% pay rise in the last 3 months, please put that in the chat box. So we'd like to know.
Yes.
But no, if there's three figures that every government will fiddle, not just this government, any government, there's three figures. One is unemployment. No government wants to be responsible for high unemployment records. Number two is inflation. That's constantly being fiddled. No one wants to be responsible for that. And the other, of course, is debt. And that's an accounting shell game, which goes on. So again, this is something you can absolutely rely on from any government, no matter who it is, Labour, Conservative, whatever. This is what you get.
Yeah. And the other thing you get is the potential for war.
Yeah.
Increasingly so.
Yeah. This is I often wondered, and we spoke about this before the show, Mike. I often wondered. Here we've got Vladimir Putin making a statement here. Now he made a statement earlier this week. Putin said that he is willing to work with any U.S. administration which comes into power in 2016, and that sort of conciliatory, moderate language. Okay, one day we might feel like we really missed the boat here. So Moscow will respond to NATO approaching Russian borders accordingly, says Vladimir Putin. So I often wondered whether war was a last resort, or whether there are people within our elite government structures who actually want it. They want war. They want war to cover up the mess which they've created over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yes.
And I'm beginning to think that there are people who actually want to see a war, Mike. And that's not a very pleasant thought. It certainly doesn't make you sleep well at night. So what is the purpose of all this? Well, firstly is financial. Okay, behind NATO, we have a number of major defense contractors. We have billions and billions and billions of dollars expenditures per month. Okay, so putting the pressure on Russia, and everyone's blaming Russia for saber rattling, but it's NATO who's doing the saber rattling. It's the United States who's saber rattling, who's overthrowing the governments in Kiev, who is sending arms to former Russian, Soviet states like the Ukraine. So we have hot zones in Georgia. We have potential hot zones in other places. Lithuania, Estonia, Poland. Yeah. Poland's being dragged into this as well.
No, Poland isn't being dragged into this. Poland is being driven into this by their own government. They are absolutely begging for full-time U.S. deployment in Poland. Anybody that's watching this in Poland, you need to do something about your government pretty quickly.
Yeah. So this is dangerous. This is, this is playing with fire essentially. And I don't think this is of Europe. This is not in the interest of Europe. This is not in the interest of the United States, or the people I'm talking about.
Yes.
Not the power structures, but the people. This is not in their interest. This sort of pressurization, which is spinning up the Cold War even more than during the Cold War.
Yeah.
Okay, they're evoking this in America, the ghost of Ronald Reagan, but Reagan was a moderate compared to what we're seeing now in terms of confrontation with the Russian Federation. So. I don't know, Mike.
I think that's a pretty good introduction to the interview that we have coming up just now. Now, before we do that, just want to remind everybody tonight is the monthly meeting for the UK column in the George in Plympton, and hope we'll see a good number of people there tonight. Just remember that the new website, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. If you like what we're doing, please support us and get on the website, start getting organised. I think we were discussing earlier how so many of the stories in the mainstream media at the moment are being used to distract people and stop them getting organised. It's time to get organised and start making some progress. So now I'd just like to introduce Mike Billington from LaRouche PAC. I interviewed him yesterday. We discussed Greece. We discussed the drive for war with Russia and the background to that. So here we go, and we will see you at 1 o'clock again tomorrow lunchtime. I'd like to welcome Mike Billington from LaRouche PAC. Hello, Mike. How are you doing?
Hi. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Yes, both. And you're in Leesburg in the United States, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, I thought we would start with Greece. And obviously, the Greeks deciding that they are going to take a hardline stance here. They're not going to submit to the IMF demands. As you quoted earlier on, but it's included in this Bloomberg article here. Tsipras said, one can only read political motives into the creditors' insistence on new cuts to pensions after 5 years of plundering them under the memorandum. We will wait patiently for the institutions to move towards realism. I mean, pensions are the target here. It seems that's a pretty nasty approach, bearing in mind the way pensions are being used in Greece at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I think before we come to that, though, I think the question of what those political motives are that Mr. Tsipras is accusing the Troika of using is really the fundamental issue. And while he didn't express it in that statement, I think the Greek leaders understand that, and they've said that the issues here are not just about the Greeks. And in fact, they're not even about just all of the Europeans, but that this is about Western civilization, which is on the line. And Helga LaRouche last week, in her presentation last weekend at a major conference we held in Paris, an international conference, made the point that if this process is not resolved in Greece, if they don't come to a resolution which includes a massive reduction in that debt, as the Greek government is demanding, then this is not just an economic collapse. This is going to very rapidly lead to the kind of global war which is now being threatened by Obama and Cameron, by the Anglo-American cabal, the Wall Street, City of London cabal. And I think you can only understand the Greek crisis and the military crisis in that context. The preparations for war in Europe, you've seen in the last week the announcement of the deployment of heavy weaponry, tanks, and other things, not just into Western Europe, but right up to Russia's border in the Balkans, as well as in Poland and other Eastern European states, which, of course, would be something of a joke if it were an actual war with Russia. Tanks and so forth would mean nothing, because we're looking at a nuclear confrontation. But in fact, that's the intention of the deployment of those forces, as evidenced by the fact that they are now, the Obama administration is openly discussing redeploying intermediate range cruise nuclear missiles into Europe and B-52s into the UK nuclear arm. Why?
They're using Russia's testing of certain missiles as an excuse for that, aren't they?
Well, there's a claim that Russia broke the INF treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Range Missile Treaty, which is simply not true. There are supposedly two cases of this. One of them is clearly just a blatant lie, which is that the Russians were testing their long-range ballistic missiles, which are legal under the various treaties. They were testing it to be able to dodge the newly deployed high-technology missile defense systems being deployed all over Europe and all over Asia in a ring around China and a ring around Russia. And they didn't need to fire that missile the whole 5,000 plus kilometers to do this test. They only needed to deploy it about half that long. And the West claimed this was a breach of the INF, which is clearly false. They claim there's another incident, which they won't explain. So on the basis of this falsehood and unexplained so-called incident in Russia, they are saying that we are about to drop out of the INF and redeploy these nuclear missiles into Europe. The Deputy Secretary of Defense, Scheer, testified just a few weeks ago in the Congress that these missiles have only one purpose, which is to take out an enemy's counterforce. In other words, a belief, an insane belief, that somehow we could use these missiles to take out a potential response from Russia to a first strike attack. So they are clearly preparing for the first strike attack, which in fact has become our strategic policy anyway, through something called prompt global strike, and in Asia, the air-sea battle. So this war situation is intense, and any spark could knock this out, given the insanity of the president in the White House and his mentor, you might say, in London. That is the crisis that we're facing, and I would say that the Greeks are aware that that's the circumstance in which this showdown over the bankruptcy of the Western financial system is taking place.
And of course, if the Greeks do refuse to cooperate with the IMF, that more than has the potential to bring down the whole Western financial system.
Absolutely. What they're requesting is that they have a London conference, like was held in 1951 for Germany after the war. At that time, the conference in London wrote off nearly half, or approximately half, of the German debt from the war, which they clearly couldn't pay. The debt was overwhelming the productive capacity of the nation. And it was that London debt conference which made it possible for Germany to recover and to become a major industrial power in the world, a major force for progress and development in Europe and around the world. That's what the Greeks are requesting. The problem they're facing is in terms of, if you look at it from the perspective of the Troika, the IMF, the European Central Bank, and so on, is that it's not like 1951, where if you wrote off this debt, it would just be a certain amount of debt written off in the banks. You're now in the world of the global gambling casino, the derivative bubble, the nearly $2 quadrillion in derivatives that are now piled on top of every kind of a form of trade or development. And in the case of this debt, we don't know the number. I don't think anybody knows. But there are literally tens of billions of dollars, perhaps even trillions. Perhaps that would be an exaggeration. Piled in the form of credit default swaps and other kinds of derivatives, sitting on top of that debt in Greece. So the write-off of even a small portion of that debt could very well spark the collapse of a $2 quadrillion derivative bubble and be the end of the Western banking system altogether. And therefore, they take the hard line. And the hard line is incredibly genocidal, as you were indicated at the beginning. The question of pensions, just yesterday, it was a competent report was done showing that already under the previous government in Greece, the Troika had cut pensions by nearly half. And the current proposal they're making to Greece is that those pensions be cut by another 20%. And what you have in Greece, with over 50% unemployment of the youth and hundreds of thousands of adults unemployed, you have in many, many cases, thousands of cases, 3 generations of a family, 3 family groupings living off the pension of their grandfather, which is being gutted to the bone. So this is a case of not only the loss of dignity, as Mr. Tsipras and Varoufakis and others insisted, but it's outright death, genocide. It cannot be accepted. They will not accept it. And on both sides, as you can see, the only solution to this is writing off the debt, not only in Greece, but internationally, through the kind of Glass-Steagall reform that we've been fighting for in the U.S. and in Europe, and which, in fact, our Italian friends have introduced into the European Parliament as a policy for Europe-wide Glass-Steagall, dividing the investment and commercial banks, and essentially allowing the derivative bubble to collapse, and with it, many of the so-called too-big-to-fail banks. And that's without that solution, there is no solution, because the debts cannot be paid. It's not a question of will they bite the bullet and pay these debts. It's impossible. The productive power of the nations of the world cannot meet the debt requirements that have been piled up through this massive gambling casino known as the bubble. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and of course, the financial system isn't going to contemplate that as an option, and so really the only option they see, or at least this is the danger, is it not? The only option they see is to create a war, kick the chessboard over, as the saying goes.
In a sense, I think, but more important, it's that the war is not just a war for money's sake. Some people make the argument falsely, I think. Some of the left sometimes say that the reason they want wars is that feeds the military-industrial complex. That's not it. There's aspects of that. But the key here is that the solution to this financial crisis and the solution to the war danger lies in what's happening with the BRICS nations. I'm sure you've discussed this over and over in your show, starting last summer when the BRICS met in Fortaleza, Brazil, and began creating new financial institutions, the new development bank for the BRICS, the Chinese Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the SCO Bank, a special Chinese fund for the new Silk Road and the new Maritime Silk Road. They have begun putting in place, not just talking about, but actually putting in place a new global financial institution which offers to the rest of the world, especially the Africans and the South Americans and the Asians, who have been forced up until this point to look to the only game in town, which is the IMF and the World Bank, which long ago stopped funding infrastructure, only imposed austerity conditions like we see in Greece on the rest of the third world. And now there's another game. And that other game is not geopolitical. They're not saying, come to our side and screw the other side. What Xi Jinping and the BRICS nations are saying to the developing sector and to the West is join us. We need to rebuild the world, not just the third world. America is in dire need of aid for infrastructure development. We need to reform our own financial system through a Glass-Steagall, but we need to join with the BRICS, which is what Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche and the Schiller Institute have fought for with our global petition for Europe and America to stop the geopolitics, stop the encirclement of Russia and China, the threat of nuclear war, and instead to join with these BRICS nations in these great development projects where they're building railroads across South America and Africa. They're building nuclear power plants, which the U.S. long ago gave up building even in our own country. Building a space program, which brings the rest of the world together, while the U.S. has given up, by and large, on its own space program, and so on. This is a case of two totally distinct paradigms facing the human race today. One based on honoring the humanity of each and every citizen of the world, development, increasing the productivity through vast infrastructure development. The other, the collapsing Western banking system, which has nowhere to look except genocidal austerity policies on itself and on the rest of the world. So when you look at the world from the perspective of the City of London and Wall Street, what they see is this BRICS nation taking their lunch, their free lunch that they've enjoyed in the third world, looting their resources and giving them nothing in return except debt to use as a lever for controlling their policies. The BRICS is going in and saying, no, we're going to build infrastructures. We need raw materials too, but we're going to pay for them by building viable states through this infrastructure development, through power, water, and so forth, transportation. So that's driving the war. The view from Wall Street, who run the economies in the West, unfortunately, is we have to destroy this BRICS process by any means necessary. If they won't back down, and they won't, then we are willing to go to war, even in nuclear.
Now, one of the options that they had for potentially destroying the BRICS process, of course, was the TPP, and as we can see from this article here, Obama struggling to get what he wants from the Congress over Trans-Pacific Partnership, and in fact, as we've seen from EU Reporter here, the European Parliament having similar problems with the European version of it. And I mean, you may have a different view about this, but I think that if probably the push for war would not have been so strong if they'd managed to get this through without any sort of opposition. But the opposition is clearly so strong that they're not going to get it through in time to build their new legal framework and their new pan-national framework, which may have been enough to protect them, at least for the next 50, 100 years, whatever. But so, you know, this is not going through as in the way that they had hoped or imagined, and really that has got to be one of the drivers that's pushing the war drums quite so hard, is it not?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think it's the way you put it. The TPP itself is part of the war drive. There's no question. If they were to get the TPP through, it would simply aggravate their anti-China position in Asia, trying to effectively impose anti-sovereignty policies on those countries that join it, including our own, because that's really, it's not much of a trade deal. And the same thing for the TTIP. It's not so much a trade deal as a treaty which sacrifices the sovereignty of those nations that join it to a supranational body, sort of the way the EU sacrificed the independence of the nation to an unelected bureaucracy in Brussels. The same thing is true for the TPP. But I think you're right in the sense that the more that Obama is being openly challenged by the Democratic Party, by his party in the U.S., and by the way, there's an update from this morning you may not have heard. When his TPP, his fast-track proposal, was defeated soundly after Obama going to the Congress, meeting with the Democrats, his party, and lecturing them that they had to pass these bills. And in fact, he said, this is not about trade, this is about me. You have to do what I say, and refused to take a single question from any of his own party members in the Democratic Congress. And the Democrats walked out and said, screw you, and voted overwhelmingly, 300 and something to 100 and something, to defeat this effort to ram through fast track. It was done through defeating a secondary bill that was attached to it. But the point was very clear. Headlines around the world, brutal defeat for Obama. So Obama immediately announced that he was going to have a re-vote on that connected item that was defeated today, Tuesday. And we heard this morning, as of late last night, that vote has been postponed because they do not have the votes, despite massive arm twisting of the Democrats by Obama and by his cohorts at the White House. And that was put off. They're going to wait several months at least to try to come up with some sort of proposal. But what I would say is what you said about the war danger is real. The more Obama sees that he is increasingly in a position where his own party recognizes his treason, not just on trade, but on breaching the Constitution through waging illegal wars against nations that are no threat to us, turning nations into warring terrorist factions like we did in Iraq and Libya and we're trying to do in Syria or have done already, and so forth. And most importantly, if we can get these congressmen who now recognize the mental instability of this president and the treason of this president to focus on the fact that he is so frantic and so desperate that he's getting more and more anxious to push the button. And he has to be taken out of office through constitutional means to prevent this war from breaking out. The warning from the Russians could not be clearer that this madman in the West is threatening to bring the world into a nuclear holocaust that could mean the annihilation of the human race, perhaps within the coming weeks. That's how dangerous this situation is. So the potential for cleaning out America through a process of not only identifying his crimes and removing him, but then implementing the Glass-Steagall policy, putting the bankers in jail, the too big to jail bankers in jail, and saving our commercial banking system through Glass-Steagall, and joining with the BRICS in this new paradigm for mankind, restore America's historic policy of placing value on each and every human being and on using development as a way of uplifting the productivity of our own nation and nations around the world. That used to be the American system under people like Franklin Roosevelt, based on the Hamiltonian principles of predatory policies, national banking. This is the most dangerous moment in history, in perhaps centuries. But it also is the moment of the greatest potential and potential for literally unleashing a global renaissance rather than a global war.
Brilliant. Well, I think, Mike, we should leave it there for now, and hopefully we'll see you on here not too distant future. Just like to say thank you very much for joining us. How do people find you on the internet and so on?
Well, the LaRouche PAC, www.LaRouche, PAC for Political Action Committee, is our main website. The EIR website is LaRouche, LaRouche, pub, pub.com. Those two websites are our primary websites, and I encourage you to go to it, and encourage all of the listeners to sign the Schiller Institute petition, which you can find on the LaRouche PAC website, calling on the U.S. and Europe to stop the geopolitical war confrontations and to join with the BRICS nations in doing what the Western world was committed to doing, which is building civilization, not destroying.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mike.